Hello everyone, please tell me. Which city are you listening from? What time is it there? It was a warm spring afternoon when I decided to take a walk through the park. The kind of day where the sun feels soft against your skin, and the world seems to slow down just enough to let you catch your breath. I had been feeling out of sorts lately, overwhelmed by the constant rush of life, work, and everything else, and I thought a quiet stroll through the park would clear my mind. The park was just a few blocks from my apartment. It wasn't the most glamorous park, but it had always been peaceful, almost nostalgic, with its tall trees and worn-out benches. The faint smell of grass and earth in the air was comforting, the sort of place you walk to in order to escape the noise of the world. I entered through the usual gate, its old iron bars creaking slightly as they swung open. I smiled to myself, thinking how this was the one thing that hadn't changed in all the years I had been coming here. The gate always creaked. The same gate, the same path, the same view of the trees stretching high above, creating a canopy of green. I walked deeper into the park, taking my time. The gentle rustling of leaves above and the distant sound of children playing somewhere near the playground were soothing. I wandered past the lake, watched a few ducks gliding across the water, and slowly made my way to the farthest end of the park, where the trees grew denser and the world seemed even quieter. It was when I turned to head back that I noticed something off. I had been so absorbed in my thoughts during the walk that I hadn't paid attention to how far I had gone. But now, as I approached the familiar path that led to the entrance, something felt strange. The gate asterisk wasn't open anymore. At first, I thought I must have missed the time. Maybe the park closed early for some reason. I assumed the gatekeeper had locked it behind me, but as I walked closer, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The padlock that usually hung loosely, a relic from a time long past, was firmly in place. The gate was locked. I stood there, staring at it, my mind racing. Had I walked past some sort of closure time that I wasn't aware of? The gates hadn't looked like they were about to close when I entered, and the park never had a posted schedule. But even then, something didn't sit right. I stepped forward, testing the gate, but it didn't budge. It was locked, as if it had been bolted shut from the inside. I took a deep breath, thinking maybe I had just overlooked something. Perhaps there was another way out. I walked around the perimeter of the park, looking for any other exits, but each one was locked or blocked off in some way. The old chain-link fence that ran along the back was intact, no gaps, no openings. I tried calling out, thinking maybe someone would hear me and come to open the gate, but my voice felt muffled, like it was swallowed by the still air. The strangest part, though, was the silence. The park, which had once felt so full of life, the sound of children laughing, dogs barking, the occasional shuffle of someone walking by, was eerily quiet now. The air felt heavy, and the trees above seemed to close in around me, their branches swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. I tried the gate again, shaking it with more force this time, desperate to escape. But it remained steadfast. I looked around for anyone at all who could help me, but there was no one. The park, once full of life, seemed completely abandoned now. There were no people on the benches, no joggers, no children near the playground. The place felt forgotten. panic started to creep in. I checked my phone, no signal. The time seemed to have slowed, as if the world outside this small space no longer existed. I had no idea how long I'd been in the park, but it felt as if I had walked into a different version of reality. I could see the streets outside the park, the houses, the cars parked along the road. But no matter how close I got to the gate, the outside world felt unreachable. The fence, the locked gate, the silence, it all felt like I had been cut off from everything I knew. I sat down on a bench, trying to calm myself, hoping the panic would pass. But as I sat there, I began to notice something strange. The trees, which had once been full of life, were no longer moving in the way they had earlier. It wasn't a breeze that moved them, but something more subtle. The branches seemed to bend toward me, their gnarled fingers stretching out as if reaching for me. The air grew heavier, thicker with each passing moment. The sound of my own breathing was all I could hear now, but it wasn't comforting. It was too loud, too oppressive. I got up, pacing again, trying to make sense of everything. But no matter which direction I went in, I found myself drawn back to the gate. I stood there, staring at it, willing it to open, but nothing happened. I thought of going back to the center of the park, but there was no way to get there. No familiar paths to follow, no landmarks to guide me. Everything had shifted. I don't know how much time passed before I finally tried the gate one last time, but this time something was different. As my fingers brushed the metal, a faint, distant sound reached my ears, the sound of footsteps. I turned quickly, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was no one in sight. I looked back at the gate, my hand still on the lock. It was open. I stepped back, blinking in disbelief. The lock had vanished. The gate, which had been so firmly shut just moments before, now stood wide open. I didn't hesitate. I ran out of the park as quickly as I could, not looking back until I had reached the other side of the street. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see the familiar trees, the benches, the gates, but there was nothing. The park was gone. There was no trace of it. No sign that it had ever been there at all. I stood there in disbelief, my breath quickening. I looked around. The street was the same, the houses, the cars, all in their usual places. But the park, my park, was nowhere to be found. I don't know if I imagined it. I don't know what happened that day. But I do know this. I haven't walked past that corner since. And I'll never look for the park again. Because I don't think it will ever let me back in. It was one of those quiet nights where the world felt still, almost too still. I had spent the entire day locked in my apartment, buried under a stack of books and papers, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become my life. Graduate school, personal struggles, the constant pressure to perform it was all too much. Sometimes I needed a break, so after hours of staring at the screen, I decided to step away and take a walk around the apartment. The moment I stood up, a flicker of light caught my eye. The ceiling light in my living room blinked once, twice, then steadied itself. I wasn't sure if it was the bulb going bad or just the old wiring in the building, but I shrugged it off and continued walking. My apartment was small, not much more than a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom off to the side. The walls were bare, except for a few shelves with old knickknacks and the occasional photograph. It wasn't much, but it was home. I walked across the room to the window, pulling the curtains open and gazing outside. The street below was quiet, only a few people walking past here and there. Then it happened again. The lights flickered, but this time it lasted longer. It wasn't just the overhead light, it was the entire room. The shadows danced strangely on the walls, stretching and twisting unnaturally. The faint hum of the light bulb above me intensified, as if the room was holding its breath. I stepped back, startled, but I told myself it was nothing, just a malfunction, just a brief glitch in the system. I reached up and flicked the switch off, thinking maybe that would help. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, everything was still. I exhaled a long breath, telling myself I was being irrational. But then, just as I was about to move away from the light switch, the room lit up again, and that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the window just for a split second. Too quick for my brain to process. At first there was a figure standing behind me. It was me, but it wasn't me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure in the reflection stood just as I did, a mirror image of myself. It was wearing the same clothes, had the same posture, but something about it felt wrong. The reflection's movements were just a fraction of a second too slow, too deliberate. It felt like an echo, like I was seeing myself, but at a distance, like it was someone else wearing my skin, mimicking my every move. I spun around quickly, expecting to see someone behind me, but the room was empty. The air felt heavier now, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. The floor creaked beneath my feet, the only sound in the silence. I stepped closer to the window, the reflection now a perfect mirror of my own movements, my own confused expression. I shook my head. Maybe the stress of everything had finally caught up with me, and my mind was playing tricks. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. But as I looked into the reflection again, I saw it. The figure wasn't exactly mimicking me anymore. It had changed. The figure in the reflection was smiling. Not a smile of my own making, not a smile of recognition. No, this smile was wide, unnervingly wide, stretching across the face of the reflection like something wrong. My heart skipped a beat. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't me. I reached for my phone, wanting to break the silence, to check the time or maybe distract myself with something, anything, but when I looked back up from the screen, the reflection was gone. I blinked, confused. The room was back to normal. The light above me was steady again, no longer flickering. The shadows were regular, the air calm. My reflection stared back at me in the window, just as it should have been. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or even more disturbed. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I couldn't shake the image of that smile, the way the reflection had been. The next morning, I tried to ignore it. It had been late, I was tired, and it was probably just a trick of the mind. I decided to get on with my day, get out of my apartment, maybe take a walk in the park to clear my head. But as I stood in front of the mirror while brushing my teeth, I noticed something. A faint mark on the side of my neck right, where the reflection's smile had seemed to linger. Just a hint of something that didn't belong. I reached up to touch it, my fingers grazing the cool skin. It was real. It wasn't a scratch or bruise, but something more subtle, more unsettling. A mark. I looked into the mirror again, and this time, I didn't see myself. Instead, I saw the reflection of someone else, someone I didn't recognize. It was the same smile. The same unnerving grin, wide and stretching across the face of the person in the mirror. I stepped back, my pulse racing, and for a moment, I wondered if I had truly lost my mind. I wiped my eyes, blinking hard, and when I looked again, I was back in front of the mirror, my own face staring back at me. Nothing was out of place. The mark was gone. But the feeling wasn't. Since that night, I've had the strangest sensation. Every time I pass a mirror or glance into a window, I get the nagging feeling that something is there, lurking just behind me, waiting. I'm not sure what happened in that moment, whether it was a trick of the light or something more. But I can't escape the feeling that the reflection I saw was never really me at all. It wasn't just the smile that felt wrong. It was the presence. The way it stood there, watching me, smiling without a reason. And the worst part? I can't stop wondering if I'll see it again. I never believed in coincidences, at least not the kind that made you question reality itself. But that day, when I found my picture in the newspaper, when I saw myself clear as day, in an image of a crowd I had never been a part of, was a moment that unraveled everything I thought I knew. It started like any other morning. I woke up late, rushed through my morning routine, and grabbed the newspaper on my way out, just like I did every day. The smell of ink, the rustling of the paper was comforting in its predictability. I always skimmed the front page, catching up on the headlines, then flipped through the local section. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual stories about the weather, community events, and politics. I wasn't paying close attention when I reached the second section, but then something caught my eye. A photo on the page that looked familiar. At first glance, it seemed like just another shot of a crowd at a local event, a concert, maybe, or a festival. The kind of thing that newspapers love to cover. But as I looked closer, I froze. There I was. My face, unmistakable, staring out from the page. I was in the middle of the crowd, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. I was wearing the same clothes I'd worn the day before, the same tired expression I often had when I went about my day. But here's the thing, I hadn't been at any event. I hadn't been in a crowd like that. I hadn't been anywhere near that location. I stared at the photo, my pulse quickening. There was no mistaking it. It was me, but it wasn't possible. I flipped back to the headline to see if there was some explanation, some context that could make sense of what I was seeing. The article talked about a local rally, some protest or demonstration, but I didn't recognize the event. And more disturbingly, I couldn't recall ever attending anything like it. I turned the page, hoping it was some kind of mistake. Maybe it was a mix-up, another person who looked like me, but no. The picture, even as it was printed on newsprint, felt like it was staring back at me. It felt too real. I put the paper down, trying to steady my breathing, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind. It gnawed at me. How was it even possible? How had my picture appeared in a place I hadn't been? I decided to call the newspaper office, thinking maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I couldn't place the event, couldn't think of any reason why I would be there. The more I tried to rationalize it, the worse the feeling grew. I paced around the apartment, my mind running in circles, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but somehow I knew deep down that it was related. I picked it up, my hand trembling. "Hello," I said, my voice shaky. "Is this the person from the rally?" A voice on the other end asked, calm but with an edge of urgency. It sounded distant, like it was coming through a fog. I'm not sure what you mean." "What rally?" "The one you attended yesterday. We need your statement. The paper's been trying to reach you. We need your comment about the protest." My stomach churned. I wasn't at any rally. "I don't know what you're talking about." There was a pause on the other end, as though the person was confused by my response. Then, as if they were speaking through gritted teeth, they said, "You should remember. You were there. It's all over the news." The line went dead. I stood there, holding the phone, the cold feeling of dread creeping over me. How could someone call me, reference an event I had no memory of, and speak with such certainty about my presence? What was going on? I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find out more. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, my thoughts clouded with unease. The photo was still fresh in my mind, the image of me among strangers, frozen in time. I went to the local newsstand to pick up another copy of the paper, hoping there would be more details, some piece of information I could use to piece it all together. But when I picked up the newspaper, something made my blood run cold. The photo was gone. The entire section had been replaced. The rally, the crowd, my face, it was like it had never existed at all. The article had changed to, now discussing something else entirely, an unrelated event, completely different from what had been on the front page just a few hours ago. I flipped through the pages again, searching for some sign of what had been there earlier, but there was nothing. The picture, the mention of the rally * gone *. The pages were unchanged from the rest of the paper, except for that one section. I walked back to my apartment in a daze, unable to process what was happening. I checked my phone for any missed calls or messages, but there was nothing. No sign of the call I had received. No trace of the number. I sat down at my kitchen table, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of everything. It was as if the whole thing had been erased, like it had never happened. But the feeling lingered, and I couldn't escape it. I still don't know what happened. I still don't know why I saw my picture in that newspaper, or why I had no memory of the event. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, somewhere. A truth that's been hidden, a part of me that doesn't belong to me anymore. And every now and then, when I pick up the newspaper, I wonder if I'll see it again. If my face will appear, this time in a place I know, or even worse *, a place I've never been at all *. It's strange how something so simple can make you question everything you think you know. I never believed in things that couldn't be explained. Never entertained the idea that there were forces at play beyond what the eye could see. But that night, everything changed. I had just moved into a new apartment, a small place in an older building on the edge of town. The kind of place with creaky floors and thin walls that let you hear every conversation, every footstep from the apartments around you. But it was cheap, and I was excited about the space's new beginnings, a fresh start. The first few nights were uneventful, filled with the typical unpacking and settling in. It was one evening, a few days after I had finished moving in, that the strange occurrence happened. I had just finished taking a shower and was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, wiping the steam from the glass so I could see my reflection. The bathroom, like the rest of the apartment, was old but functional. A simple mirror hung on the wall above the sink, framed in a tarnished silver that seemed to add to the room's aged charm. As I wiped the condensation off, I noticed something in the corner of the mirror, just beyond the place where the steam had settled. There, etched into the foggy glass, were letters. Not just random marks, but a few clear words, asterisk, asterisk, look behind you. Asterisk, asterisk, I froze, staring at the mirror, my heart skipping a beat. I thought I must be imagining things, maybe I had moved too quickly, or perhaps it was a trick of the steam, but no. The words were there, unmistakable in their clarity. My first instinct was to wipe the mirror again, to erase whatever had appeared, but I hesitated. The message felt wrong. It wasn't something I'd written, and I couldn't imagine how it had gotten there. I turned around slowly, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was no one. The bathroom door was still shut, the small space entirely empty. I breathed a sigh of relief, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I grabbed a towel, wiped the mirror down, and the words vanished. They disappeared as if they had never been there, leaving no trace, no sign that anything unusual had occurred. Just the ordinary, unremarkable reflection of my own face staring back at me. I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe it had been condensation, or a trick of the light, or my imagination running wild. But the words, asterisk, look behind you, asterisk, lingered in my mind, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The rest of the night was uneventful. I went to bed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. After all, who would believe me? It was ridiculous, right? But then, the next night, it happened again. I was in the bathroom, finishing my usual evening routine, when I saw those same words, once again, slowly appearing in the foggy glass of the mirror. Asterisk, asterisk, look behind you. Asterisk, asterisk, this time, I didn't hesitate. I turned around immediately, expecting no, asterisk, dreading asterisk what I might find. But again, there was nothing. The bathroom door was shut. No one was standing behind me. I felt a cold chill wash over me as I turned back to the mirror. The words were still there, clear and distinct. I wiped the mirror down, the same way I had the night before, but this time something felt different. The words didn't vanish. They stayed on the surface of the glass, taunting me, refusing to disappear. I wiped harder, my hands trembling, but no matter how much I scrubbed, the words remained. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the mirror, the words glaring back at me, impossible to ignore. My breathing quickened as panic slowly crept in, but then, as if in response to my desperation, the words finally faded. Slowly, as though they were being erased by an invisible hand, they dissolved into the glass, leaving only a clean, empty surface. I ran out of the bathroom, my heart racing in my chest. The apartment, which had once felt like a new beginning, suddenly felt foreign to me. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that the stress of moving and settling in was getting to me, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something was happening here that I couldn't explain. I spent the next few days in a haze, too afraid to go near the bathroom. I didn't look in the mirror, didn't take a shower, didn't allow myself to think about what had happened. But despite my best efforts to ignore it, the unease never left. The feeling that I was being watched, that there was something just beyond the surface of this apartment, something that had been waiting for me. And then, it happened again. This time, I was brushing my teeth, my reflection staring back at me in the mirror. I didn't even realize it at first, too caught up in the rhythm of my own movements. But then, I saw them asterisk, those words asterisk appear once more, slowly materializing on the foggy glass. Asterisk, asterisk, look behind you. Asterisk, asterisk, I didn't turn around this time. I couldn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared at the words, feeling the weight of them pressing against me. I could almost hear a voice in my head, whispering softly, urging me to look. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The longer I stared at the mirror, the more the air around me seemed to change. The temperature dropped. The faint hum of the apartment's old pipes grew louder, like distant whispers in the walls. I wiped the mirror again, but this time, the words didn't fade. They only grew clearer. And then, the reflection in the mirror changed. I couldn't explain it. One moment, I was staring at myself, brushing my teeth as I always did, and the next, there was a figure behind me, a silhouette. Faint, but unmistakable. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, unable to move, unable to look away. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, still, watching me through the mirror. I couldn't see its face. I didn't want to see its face. I turned away from the mirror quickly, my heart racing, my legs weak beneath me. But when I looked back, the bathroom was empty. The figure was gone. I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I couldn't stay in that place where the mirror seemed to hold a secret, a mystery that I was never meant to understand. I packed up what little I had left and left that apartment behind. But even now, when I close my eyes at night, I can still feel it, the gaze from the mirror, the words that never should have been written, and the shadow that watched me from beyond the glass. I don't know who or asterisk what asterisk was trying to reach me, but one thing is certain. The next place I live will never have a mirror. It was one of those days where everything felt slightly off, like the world was a little out of sync. I had moved into the building just a few weeks ago, a small, quiet complex tucked away on the edge of town. The kind of place where the walls were thin enough that you could hear the hum of life from the apartments around you. but not so thin that it felt intrusive, at least. That's what I thought. The apartment next door had been empty when I first moved in. I had assumed it was one of those places where someone would come and go. A transient space, just another temporary residence like mine. It was the kind of building that felt like a stopgap in people's lives. A place they stayed until they found something more permanent. That was fine by me. I wasn't there to get to know my neighbors or settle in for long. I was there for the quiet, for the isolation, for the reprieve from the chaos I had left behind. But then, one evening, the music started. It was faint at first, barely audible. The soft strumming of an acoustic guitar, the kind of music that drifts into the background and doesn't demand your attention. I thought it was just my imagination, the sounds from the street below or someone's radio drifting up through the walls. But then it kept going. The music lingered, curling around the edges of my thoughts, weaving through the air in a way that felt deliberate, intentional. I could hear it clearly now, the gentle chord progressions, the rhythm that was almost too soothing. But as I sat there in my living room, staring at the quiet, dim apartment, I realized something. There was no one in the apartment next door. I hadn't seen anyone come or go for days. There had been no signs of life. No footsteps in the hall, no doors opening or closing. It was as if the place was abandoned, left behind, and yet, the music played on. I stood up from the couch, walking cautiously toward the wall where I knew the shared space with the neighboring apartment was. The music was louder now, clearer. The melody seemed to fill the air, somehow familiar. Like a song I'd heard before, but couldn't place. It was strange, comforting in a way, but also deeply unsettling. The more I listened, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to catch a glimpse of anything unusual, but there was nothing. No creaks, no footsteps, no movement. Just the music, soft and continuous, as if the room next door was alive with sound, with a life that didn't belong to the empty space it filled. I pulled away from the wall, a chill running down my spine. The quiet after the music was almost deafening, the absence of any other sound too pronounced, too wrong. I walked back to my couch, picking up my phone to call the landlord, but I hesitated. What was I going to say? I hear music from the apartment next door, but no one is there. It sounded ridiculous. Maybe I was just overthinking things. But that night, as I tried to fall asleep, I could still hear it. The music, the soft strumming, the haunting melody that seemed to linger just beyond my reach. It echoed through the walls like a presence, something alive, something waiting. The next day, I couldn't resist. I had to know. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something I couldn't quite explain. I stepped out into the hallway, glancing at the apartment next door. The door was still closed, the same as it had been for days. No signs of life. No movement behind the curtains. But I knew the music was still playing. I knocked on the door, the sound sharp in the quiet hallway. Nothing. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, but there was still no answer. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I should just leave it alone, but my curiosity was stronger. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, half expecting the door to be empty, but it turned easily in my hand. I stepped inside, the hinges creaking softly as I opened the door. The room was dim, just as I had expected. Dust floated in the air, caught in the pale light from the cracked blinds. There was no sign of life here. The apartment looked abandoned, empty, untouched by time, as though no one had lived there for years. But the music was louder now, unmistakable in its presence. It was coming from the back room, the one that would have been the bedroom. I moved cautiously through the living room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The song was familiar now, like a lullaby, soft but full of longing, as if it were trying to tell me something. Something I couldn't understand. I stood at the threshold of the bedroom door, staring into the darkness. The room was as untouched as the rest of the apartment, save for the music, which seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and reached for the light switch. As the light flickered on, I froze. The room was empty. Completely empty. The bed, the furniture, everything was gone. There was no sign of anyone ever having lived there. The walls were bare, the floor covered in dust, the air stale with neglect. But the music the music was still playing. It was coming from the closet. I walked toward it, my hand trembling as I reached for the door. The knob turned easily, and as I pulled it open, the sound of the guitar stopped abruptly. There was no one there, nothing, just an empty, dark closet with a few scattered clothes on the floor and a faint smell of mildew. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty closet, trying to make sense of the sound that had filled the apartment. But there was no explanation. There was no one there to explain it to me. I left the apartment quickly, closing the door behind me, and hurried back to my own place. But as I walked back down the hallway, I could still hear it. The music, softly, almost imperceptibly, floating through the walls, like a whisper from a place that no longer existed. The apartment next door remained abandoned, empty, silent, and yet, every night, I could hear the music playing again. It's strange how quickly the mind can slip into a rhythm, how it can convince you that everything is exactly as it should be. That's what I thought, anyway, as I stood at the train platform that late evening, waiting for the last train of the day. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep purple, and the chill in the air made my breath visible in the light from the station lamps. It had been a long week, one of those weeks that leaves you feeling a little empty, like you've been running on autopilot. I was looking forward to the peace of the train ride, to the soft hum of the wheels on the tracks, to the fleeting moments where the world outside could blur and everything felt distant. I had arrived early, as I often did, enjoying the quiet solitude of the nearly empty platform. The station was always quieter at this time of night, the rush of commuters long gone, leaving only the occasional figure hurrying to catch the last train or the lone traveler like me, waiting for their ride home. I stood near the edge of the platform, my suitcase by my side, my gaze distant as I let the sound of the evening traffic in the distance mingle with the low hum of the station's fluorescent lights. The train was due in 5 minutes. I looked at my watch. It was 11:32 p.m. I could hear the faint sound of an approaching train. the telltale whistle growing louder as it neared. I stepped forward a little, glancing down the tracks, but the platform was still mostly empty. There were a few other people scattered across the distance, their figures blurred and indistinct in the dim light. The train's lights came into view, growing brighter as it rounded the bend, the rumble of its engine shaking the ground beneath me. It was coming. But then, just as the train reached the platform, something strange happened. It didn't stop. I stood there, confused, my feet frozen to the platform as the train sped past me, not slowing, not even acknowledging the station. It was as if it hadn't seen me at all. The light from the train's windows blurred by so quickly. The sound of its wheels screeching against the track was drowned out by the roaring wind, but it didn't matter. The train was gone, already disappearing into the night, its taillights vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. I stood there for a long moment, not quite sure what to do. I glanced around, my heart racing now, my mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. The platform was still empty. I hadn't imagined it, had I? The train had been right there. I had seen it. I had heard it. It was supposed to stop. But it didn't. I reached for my phone, hoping maybe there had been some announcement I missed, something about a delay or a change in schedule. I checked the time, again 11:35 p.m. 5 minutes had passed since the train was supposed to have arrived. I saw the station's screen flicker in the corner of my eye, the usual schedule scrolling down. It was showing the same thing, 11:30 p.m., last train to the city. But it wasn't there. I checked my phone again, trying to reassure myself. I had seen the train come in, I had heard it. But when I looked back at the screen, my heart dropped. It was as if the train had never even been there. The schedule was still showing 11:30, as if nothing had happened, as if no train had ever come at all. I swallowed, my throat dry, and looked down the tracks. The night was still, the platform deserted, and the station seemed eerily quiet now. Had I missed something? Had the train left earlier than it was supposed to, or was this some strange mistake in my mind? But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't imagined it. I could still hear the whistle in my head, still feel the vibration of the ground beneath me. The train had been right there, just moments ago. I wasn't sure what to do. I checked the schedule again, but nothing had changed. The platform was silent, except for the occasional echo of my own footsteps, now loud in the emptiness. I didn't want to be standing here alone. I didn't want to feel this strange disconnect between the reality I had experienced just moments ago and the empty platform that greeted me now. I grabbed my suitcase and started walking toward the exit, my steps quick and unsteady. The station, which had felt familiar just an hour ago, now felt alien. The walls seemed to close in around me, the overhead lights buzzing in a way that felt more sinister than usual. I glanced over my shoulder as I walked, half expecting to see the train pulling into the station again, as if it had never left. But nothing. Just the silence of the station, the empty platform behind me. As I reached the stairs leading out of the station, I heard something else. A distant rumble. The unmistakable sound of a train approaching. I froze in my tracks, my heart leaping into my throat. Could it be the next one? Could I have missed the first train somehow? Or was it? I turned back to look at the platform, but the noise quickly faded into the night. It was as if the train had never been there at all. I shook my head, disoriented. I couldn't stay here any longer. The air felt thick, the station now oppressive in a way I couldn't explain. I hurried out of the station, my mind racing, and as I stepped onto the street, I glanced back once more. The platform was empty. The lights flickered overhead. The station was still. But the schedule board, I noticed, showing the exact same thing it had shown before. 11:30 p.m. Last train to the city. And just like that, the rumble of the train came again. Faint but undeniable, as though the same train, the one I had missed, was circling back, ready to arrive once more. I didn't wait to find out if it would stop this time. It was one of those nights that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The kind of still, oppressive silence that seems to stretch on, making every small sound your own breath, the rustle of a page-turning sound louder than it should. I had been reading for hours, my mind distracted, skimming through pages as I tried to force myself to focus. It wasn't even that late, just a little past midnight. But I had that familiar pull towards sleep, my eyelids heavy, but not yet ready to surrender. The room was dimly lit, just the soft glow of a bedside lamp casting long shadows across the walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, a book in my hands, trying to finish at least one more chapter before sleep claimed me. The window was cracked open, letting in the cool night air, and I could hear the soft rustling of the leaves outside, the occasional distant sound of a car driving by. It was peaceful, but somehow the quiet felt thick. There was something about the calmness of the night that made everything feel just a little off. I don't know what made me look up, but I did. I glanced toward the far corner of the room, near the doorway where the light from the lamp didn't quite reach. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the darkness, but then I saw it something darker than the shadows around it, a movement. A figure, or perhaps just the suggestion of one, slipping across the edge of the wall. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light, maybe the shifting of the lamp's glow creating odd shapes. But no, the shadow had definitely moved. It wasn't the way shadows behave naturally in the wavering dance of light. It was deliberate, purposeful. I stood up from the bed, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed that I was imagining things, that it was just a trick of fatigue. But my feet carried me forward, almost without my consent. I didn't take my eyes off the corner, where the shadow had disappeared, moving with a strange fluidity, as if it had substance, like it wasn't just a shadow, but something else. Something more. The room was still and quiet, except for the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I stepped toward the corner slowly, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling as I crossed the floor. The air felt heavier here, as though the very space around the corner was thick with something I couldn't see. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and touched the wall where the shadow had moved. It was cold, colder than the rest of the room. I turned back, half expecting to see anything following me. But there was nothing. The room was as it had been when I first sat down, save for the oppressive weight that now hung in the air. My mind fought to rationalize it. I'd been reading for hours, my eyes tired. Maybe it was a trick of the lighting, an overactive imagination, or even the shadows cast by the wind outside, making everything seem just a little more surreal. But no matter how much I tried to tell myself that, the feeling of being watched, of being not alone didn't go away. It lingered in the space between breaths. I slowly returned to the bed, trying to calm myself. But as I sat down, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was wrong, something just out of my reach, something hiding in the corners of the room. I glanced back at the corner where the shadow had moved. The room felt smaller now, as though it was closing in, as though I wasn't alone here. And for a fleeting moment, I almost thought I saw something, just the faintest hint of a shape, a shadow in the shape of a person, standing perfectly still in the corner. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the comforting mundanity of the room around me. The familiar books on the shelf, the neatly folded blankets, the clock ticking steadily in the corner. But even as I tried to ground myself in the reality of my surroundings, I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of unease, like the room itself had changed, had become something different, something darker. I tried to distract myself. I picked up my book again, trying to focus on the words, to lose myself in the pages. But my eyes kept flicking back to that corner, to the place where the shadow had been, and I could almost feel the presence of something there, just waiting, just watching. I tried to rationalize it again, to dismiss the unease as nothing more than my own imagination running wild. But the more I tried, the stronger the feeling became. It was like something was there, just beyond the edge of my sight, something that didn't belong, something that wasn't supposed to be in this room with me. I set the book down, deciding that sleep was the best escape. I lay back in bed, pulling the covers over my shoulders. The room was still, but now it felt like it was holding its breath. The quiet was deeper, more oppressive, as though the walls were closing in. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing, trying to find a way to shake the feeling of unease. Then, just as I was about to close my eyes, I heard it. A sound soft and barely audible, but unmistakable. A faint rustle, like the shifting of fabric. The smallest creak, like someone stepping quietly on the floor, just behind me. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat, my chest tight with fear. The rustling stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears. I dared not turn around. I couldn't. But I knew deep down that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The shadow had never truly left, and now it was closer than ever. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't, and every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it, the presence, lingering just out of sight, waiting for me to look, waiting for me to see. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun was just beginning to peek through the clouds, casting a soft golden light across the empty street. The air had a crispness to it, the kind that only exists in early spring before the heat of summer takes over. I had woken up early, as I often did, drawn to the stillness of the world before the bustle of the day began. I live in a small town, one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and the streets feel almost too familiar. I had been walking to the cafe down the road, the same cafe I visit every morning for a cup of coffee, when something unusual happened. I was about halfway down the street, my hands tucked in my jacket pockets, the sound of my footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. The street was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves, the soft chirp of distant birds, and the faint hum of the early morning traffic in the distance. But as I passed the park, I noticed something odd. There were people gathered, standing in a large crowd around the fountain. At first, I thought it was just a group of people enjoying the morning, perhaps waiting for something. But then, I realized that the crowd was strange. They weren't moving. They weren't talking. They were simply standing there, completely still, like mannequins frozen in time. I could see the faint outlines of their faces, blurred in the distance, but no one was making a sound. No one was speaking. There was something unsettling about their stillness, like they weren't quite real, like they were trapped in a moment that they couldn't escape from. I shook my head, trying to shake off the strange feeling that was beginning to creep up my spine. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired. But I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my chest. I kept walking, my pace picking up just a little as I neared the crowd. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A laugh. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but it cut through the stillness of the morning like a sharp, sudden noise. It was a soft laugh, almost like a giggle, but there was something wrong with it. Something too light, too playful, like a cruel mockery. The laugh seemed to echo through the air, and I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I turned quickly, trying to locate the source of the laugh, expecting to see someone behind me, maybe one of the people in the crowd who had finally broken the silence. But as I looked around, I realized something shocking. I was the only one moving. The crowd, those frozen figures standing by the fountain, hadn't shifted an inch. Not a single person was walking. Not a single person was moving. They were still as statues, their eyes staring blankly ahead, their faces obscured by distance and the odd quality of the light. And yet, I had heard that laugh. That soft, mocking laugh, like it was directed right at me. I took another step, my heartbeat quickening. I wasn't imagining it. Someone had laughed. Someone had laughed at me, and I couldn't figure out who. I glanced back at the crowd, but now I was sure was the only one walking, the only one in motion, the only one moving forward through the street, while everyone else remained frozen, locked in place. The laugh echoed again, this time closer, sharper. My skin crawled. I started walking faster, my footsteps quickening, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Who was laughing at me? Why were they laughing? What was going on with the crowd? Were they real? Or were they just shadows? I was almost to the cafe when it happened again. The laugh. This time, it was louder. It was right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. The street was empty now, no one in sight. Just the park, just the fountain, with its still, lifeless crowd. I stood there for a moment, staring back at the frozen figures, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to call out, to demand to know who was there, but the words got caught in my throat. There was no one to call out to. I turned and started walking again, more quickly this time, my hands trembling at my sides. The laugh seemed to follow me, trailing just behind me like a whisper in the wind. Every step I took, the laugh grew louder, more taunting, more mocking. I could feel the weight of it pressing on me, like it was drawing me back into the crowd, forcing me to face whatever unseen presence was lurking among them. And then, just as I reached the door of the cafe, I turned once more. This time, I dared to look directly at the fountain. The crowd was still there, standing motionless. But something had changed. One of the figures was looking directly at me. Her asterisk face was staring at me from the crowd, her eyes wide, her mouth frozen in a wide, unnatural grin. I couldn't see her clearly. Her features were blurred, indistinct, but I knew she was looking at me. I could feel her eyes on me, as if she were studying me, waiting for something. And then, she laughed again. It wasn't the soft, mocking laugh anymore. No, this time, it was something else entirely. It was hollow. It was full of emptiness. It was a laugh that had no place in this world. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. I felt paralyzed, standing in the doorway of the cafe, caught between the warmth of the familiar and the chilling uncertainty that the crowd represented. The last thing I remember clearly is the laugh. The way it echoed in my mind, wrapping around me like a shadow, refusing to let me go. And as I stood there, frozen, I wondered, was it me she was laughing at? Or was it something I couldn't see, something just beyond my reach, something hiding in the frozen crowd? I still don't know. But every time I walk past that fountain, I feel the weight of her eyes on me, that mocking laugh in the air, waiting for me to turn around. And every time, I don't. It was late, far later than I intended to stay awake, but I had gotten caught up in some work, nothing important. Just some last-minute emails I had promised to answer. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tapping of the rain against my window. I lived in an old building, one of those places with thick walls and creaky floors, but it had a certain charm, the kind of place that felt like home the moment I moved in. I didn't mind the silence. In fact, I preferred it. The quiet comforted me, especially on nights like this when the world outside seemed to disappear under the weight of the rain. I had just sent my last email when I heard it. A soft crackle from the intercom in the corner of my room. It was an old system-rusted metal, scratched and dented from years of use. I had never used it much, just a holdover from when the building was newer, when the intercom was used for actual communication between apartments. But it was still there, mounted on the wall beside the door, with a small speaker and a dusty microphone. I thought nothing of it at first, assuming it was just a random noise. But then, a voice came through. It wasn't loud, just a soft, almost whispering tone. Hello. I froze. I hadn't pressed the button. The intercom hadn't been in use for as long as I could remember, and there was no reason for anyone to be trying to reach me. I leaned forward, staring at the speaker, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. I stood up, cautiously, walking toward the intercom. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but then I pressed the button. I half expected nothing to happen. Maybe it was just a fluke, a malfunction in the old wires. But instead, The voice came again. This time, it was clearer, more distinct, like someone was speaking directly into my ear. "Can you hear me?" the voice asked, soft and measured. I stepped back, my heart skipping a beat. I was alone. There was no one in the hallway. The building had been empty for days, and even if someone was outside, they wouldn't be able to reach me through this old system. The words felt like they were coming from all around me, from the very walls of the room. I stood frozen for a long moment, the air thick with the sensation that I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel the silence pressing in on me, heavy and unnerving. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, but my chest felt tight. I looked at the door, the same door I had locked earlier, the door that now felt like a barrier between me and something I couldn't understand. "I'm here," the voice said again, and this time I could almost hear the faintest trace of a smile behind the words. "You don't need to be afraid." I didn't know what to do. Should I respond? Should I ignore it? My hand hovered near the intercom, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. The voice wasn't threatening, but there was something unnerving about it. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was too calm, too intimate, like it knew me, like it was waiting for something. I backed away from the wall, my mind racing. The building was old, I reminded myself. Maybe it was just a glitch. Maybe it was the rain messing with the system, creating odd noises in the static. But it didn't feel like a glitch. It felt intentional. The voice seemed to be waiting for me, coaxing me into a conversation I hadn't agreed to. The intercom crackled again, and I could hear the faintest whisper through the static. Just a breath, like someone was standing in the room with me, close enough that I could feel their presence without seeing them. "Why won't you talk to me?" I jumped back, my heart racing. My thoughts scrambled, my mind trying to grasp at any explanation, any logical reason for what was happening. But nothing made sense. I was alone. I had to be alone. There was no one else in the apartment, no one on the other end of the intercom. I slowly approached it again, this time, my hand trembling as I reached for the button. I pressed it cautiously, barely touching it, as if afraid the voice would reach out and pull me into something I wasn't ready for. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, shaky and unsure. "Who is this?" For a moment, there was silence. And then, the voice came again, soft but unmistakable. "I'm just someone who's been waiting for you." I didn't know what to say to that. My mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of the words, trying to understand why I felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to respond. I looked around the room again, at the shadows cast by the streetlights outside, at the corners of the ceiling, at the door, still locked, still solid, but something felt different. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in, and I could almost hear the faint echo of the voice in the stillness of my own mind. I glanced at the clock. 12:15 a.m. The rain had stopped, but the air felt thick with tension. I pressed the button again, this time with more purpose, my fingers shaking slightly. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, as if the words themselves might break the fragile silence that surrounded me. The voice responded quickly, with a warmth that sent a chill down my spine. I just wanted to say goodbye. The intercom crackled again, this time louder, as though the speaker itself were strained under the weight of the words. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, there was a deep silence. The kind of silence that settles like dust, heavy and thick, suffocating in its stillness. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, but nothing came. No more whispers. No more words. Only the lingering echo of something I couldn't understand. I stepped back, my pulse pounding in my ears. My thoughts raced, but they felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice had been trying to tell me something important. Something I wasn't meant to hear. But why now? Why me? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the rain outside now silent, the apartment too still, too quiet. I looked around, half expecting to see someone in the corner of the room, a figure I hadn't noticed before. But there was nothing. The room was empty. The intercom, now silent, sat like a forgotten relic on the wall. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the voice, as if it were whispering just out of reach, just beyond my grasp. And every time I looked at the intercom, I wondered who had been waiting for me, and why had they gone silent. It was a regular Tuesday evening, or at least I thought it was. The kind of day that blurs into the others, the weather gray and dreary, the kind of rain that falls softly but never seems to end. I had been running errands, walking around the neighborhood to clear my mind, as I often did when the weight of the day got too heavy. I had no particular destination in mind, just wandering. It was a street I knew well, familiar and comfortable. I had walked it hundreds of times without thinking much of it. But on this evening, something felt off at first. It was just a subtle shift in the air, like a slight change in temperature that I couldn't quite place. I chalked it up to the rain, to the season, to the general dullness of everything. But then I walked past the building. It was an old brick building, tucked between two modern shops, its paint peeling and windows dirty. It wasn't the kind of place that would draw attention. I'd seen it a million times before. But on this particular day, as I passed it, something made me pause. I'm not sure what it was, just a flicker. Something I couldn't quite place, but the building didn't look quite right. The shape seemed a little different, the outline of the windows slightly askew. I took a few steps back and looked at it more closely, trying to figure out what had changed. But nothing made sense. It was just the same building, wasn't it? I shrugged it off, attributing it to the fog in my mind. I walked on. As I continued on my way, the feeling of unease lingered, curling around the edges of my thoughts. It was only a few minutes later, when I reached the end of the street, that I stopped. I glanced back, wondering if I had imagined it. But there, at the corner, was the same building again. The same weathered brick, the same crooked windows, just as I had passed it moments ago. But now it looked different. The paint was fresher, the windows seemed clearer, and the door there was a door I was certain had never been there before. I could have sworn the last time I passed, it had been a boarded-up entry, left untouched for years. But there it was, solid and unmistakable, standing right in front of me, its handle gleaming in the dim light. I froze for a moment, staring at it. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I walked closer, not able to pull my eyes away from the building, feeling an odd, growing discomfort in my chest. But the closer I got, the more convinced I became that it had always looked like this. I had simply never noticed before. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd just missed it before. Maybe I had never really paid attention. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned around, deciding to head back the way I had come. I needed to clear my head, to convince myself that it was all in my mind. The rain had picked up, and the soft tap of water against the pavement was the only sound breaking the stillness of the street. When I turned the corner, there it was again. The building, but it wasn't the same building anymore. This time, there were no clear windows at all. The door was gone, replaced by a strange, darkened archway, like a shadow stretched across the entrance. The brickwork looked almost ancient now, covered in creeping vines, the stone cold and unyielding. The air around it seemed thicker, heavier, as though the building itself was pulling in all the light and sound around it. I stood there, staring at it, my body frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no denying it now. The building was different. It wasn't just my imagination. It wasn't some trick of the rain or the light. This building was changing. It was as if it was shifting, evolving before my very eyes, like it was alive in some way I couldn't understand. I took a few slow steps toward it, my feet hesitant, my breath shallow. The sound of the rain against the pavement had grown fainter, almost drowned out by the heavy, oppressive silence that surrounded me. The building stood there, looming over me, its shadows stretching longer than they should. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest, the air thick and suffocating. But then, without warning, the archway seemed to shift again. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it, I felt it. The shadows moved, like something was inside, something watching me from the other side. I stepped back, instinctively, my pulse quickening. And that was when I realized something else. There were no other people around. The street was empty, the rain falling in an eerie stillness. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I didn't want to look at the building anymore, but I couldn't stop myself. I turned back, and that's when I saw it. The outline of something in one of the windows no asterisk, not the window. It wasn't a window at all. It was something else, a shape, a figure. I couldn't make out the details, but I could feel its presence. It was there, just behind the glassor, what I thought was glass, and it was watching me. I turned and ran. I don't know how far or how fast I went, but I didn't stop until I reached the next block, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I had to get away from it, had to leave that building behind. The feeling of its gaze stayed with me, heavy on my shoulders, pressing against my spine as I hurried away. When I turned the corner, I was relieved to see a familiar street ahead, a street that felt like reality, a place I knew, a place that hadn't changed. But when I looked up, I couldn't believe what I saw. There it was, again, the same building, right in front of me, as though I had never left. But it was different this time, more twisted, its windows cracked and broken, the door hanging off its hinges, the brickwork decaying like it had been abandoned for years. I felt my heart stop in my chest, a cold, icy fear gripping me. It was the same building, but it was different every time. And every time I walked past it, it became something else, something darker, something that wasn't supposed to exist. I didn't stop to look at it. I didn't dare. But the feeling stayed with me, the weight of the building's presence haunting my every step. I don't know if it was real or if it was my mind playing tricks on me. But every time I think back on it, I can't shake the thought. Asterisk, what happens if I walk past it again? Asterisk, and will it be different next time? It was a calm, peaceful evening when I stepped outside for a walk. The kind of night where the sky was a deep shade of indigo, the stars twinkling faintly above, and the air had that cool, refreshing quality that made everything feel still and undisturbed. The kind of night that felt safe, where nothing out of the ordinary could happen. My apartment is located on the edge of the city, where the streets are quieter, less trafficked. The neighborhood is small and familiar, with the same few faces I see every day. I like it that way. There's comfort in the routine, in knowing the place like the back of my hand. That night, I had no particular destination in mind, just a simple stroll to clear my head after a long day. The street was almost entirely empty, save for a few scattered cars parked along the sides. The pavement glistened faintly from a light drizzle that had passed hours before. As I walked down the street, my footsteps echoed softly against the quiet, the sound swallowed by the thick stillness of the night. The streetlights were the only things that seemed to be awake, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched across the road and sidewalks. I wasn't thinking much of anything, just letting my thoughts wander, enjoying the solitude. But then I heard it. At first, it was so quiet that I wasn't sure if it was my imagination. A soft whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable in its clarity. My name, Luke. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I turned, looking around the empty street. Nothing, not a soul in sight. No one walking, no one standing at their doorsteps. The houses along the street were dark, their windows black and lifeless, no signs of life behind them. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had heard someone calling my name. The whisper came again, this time a little louder, a little clearer. Luke. My skin tingled. It felt like a chill had suddenly swept through the air, and I pulled my jacket tighter around myself. I looked up and down the street, trying to spot anything that could explain what I had just heard. But there was nothing. The street was empty. I walked forward cautiously, my senses heightened, every nerve on edge. The silence that followed was unnerving, but that whisper, that unmistakable whisper of my name kept echoing in my mind, as if it had been real, as if someone had actually spoken it, just beyond my reach. I picked up my pace, hoping to shake the feeling of being watched, but as I walked further down the road, I heard it once more soft, almost like a breath on the wind. Luke. I froze again. This time, I was sure I wasn't imagining it. There was no one else around, no other sound. Just the quiet street, the hum of distant traffic far beyond, and my own heart pounding in my chest. I took a few steps forward, trying to follow the sound, to find the source, but the street was still empty. I reached the corner where the street met the alleyway, and my eyes scanned every inch of the street. Nothing. Just the soft glow of the streetlights casting strange, crooked shadows on the pavement. Luke. The whisper was now coming from the alley. It was distant, but distinct enough that I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. My breath hitched, and for a moment, I stood frozen, trying to decide whether I should continue, turn around, or run. A sudden gust of wind rustled through the trees at the edge of the alley. But the whisper my name was still there, cutting through the air with chilling clarity. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move. Something was pulling me toward that alley, as if I needed to understand what was happening, to uncover the source of this unnatural feeling. I took a hesitant step forward, and as I did, I noticed something strange. The atmosphere around me had shifted. Everything felt more oppressive, like the air was thick with something unseen. The shadows in the alley seemed to grow longer, darker, almost as if they were reaching out toward me. I stepped closer to the alley, my eyes darting from side to side, searching for the source of the voice. But the more I searched, the more I felt unseen. Like something was waiting just out of sight, hiding in the dark. Then, the whisper came again, louder this time, but this time, it wasn't just my name. Luke, turn around. I jerked my head back toward the street, my heart racing. The feeling of being watched was now overwhelming. I spun around quickly, scanning the empty street, but this time, something caught my eye. At the end of the road, near the intersection, was a figure, standing still, barely illuminated by the dim streetlights. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person, standing motionless. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My mind screamed to turn and run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. For a moment, I wondered if it was someone who had been waiting for me, someone I might know, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. They didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, didn't even seem aware I was standing there. It was like they weren't even alive. The whisper came again, this time close, almost directly behind me. Luke, I'm waiting for you. I spun around, and the figure was gone. The street was empty. There was no one there. No one had been there. I felt the blood drain from my face as panic flooded through me. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the first time that night, I turned and fled. I didn't look back, didn't check to see if I was being followed, I just ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the safety of my apartment, where the door slammed shut behind me with a sense of finality. I locked the door, bolted the windows, and tried to steady my breath, but the silence in the apartment felt suffocating. The whisper was still there, lingering in my ears, and the memory of that figure at the end of the street haunted me. I don't know who or what was calling me that night, but I know one thing for certain. It wasn't human. And I don't think it was ever really waiting for me to turn around.